Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope it is nice and warm or warmish wherever you're tuning in from. Our presenter today, I just wanted to introduce our presenter and real quick, this is Latasha with the IAC American Indian Foods Program. Well, our presenter today is our very own Micaela Young. She is our IAC Development Director. She earned a Master of Arts in English and Writing at Montana State University and is now a PhD candidate and researcher for the Native American Studies Native Land Project. She also serves as a core member of the Agriculture Resource Management Plan interdisciplinary team. So we are super excited to have her share some knowledge and resources with you all today. And if you do have any, I guess she'll be providing a lot of these resources in a follow-up email. But again, thank you guys for joining. And without further ado, it's all you, Micaela.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Are you able to hear me, Latasha?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, I just want to do a mic test. Okay, so well, thank you for joining me. And as I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing, I'm working from my home office, which I'm now sharing with an 8-year-old and a fish, and sometimes a very loud hound dog. So there may be some background excitement, which I actually appreciate. I love getting to know people beyond their professional selves. So happy to share that with all of you. And I also want to acknowledge just immediately our sort of limitation in time in tackling this topic. Grants are a pretty big topic, and there's a lot to learn, but based on future interest and or need, we'll potentially be developing follow-up sessions based off of modules that I worked with the National Science Foundation and a team to develop. So we can basically tailor that to meet the needs of this group and dive deeper into these topics if there's interest. So I did redesign my typical sort of grant writing 101 course to make it applicable to what's happening right now, which I'm making the sort of partial assumption that a lot of you are interested in pursuing funding that's related to the CARES Act and funding that's coming out in response to COVID, as well as just sort of understanding generally what's out there. So I really wanted to design this for everybody to be able to dive in and get going versus just encountering a bunch of concepts. So I've got resources and I've got some specific things you can start doing now to get going on your path. So I'm hoping that's helpful to you. Okay, so let's get this guy. Oh, excuse me, my PowerPoint is wanting to be silly here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay. So I want to address to start out, while I know there's a lot going on behind the scenes, the current funding environment right now has shifted significantly from what it was before COVID, and a lot of agencies and funders are scrambling to respond to the need. So the major sources that we'll be looking at and considering in this presentation, and that a lot of you are going to be considering in the near future as you approach funding are these particular sources. So as a lot of you already know, through the CARES Act, there's quite a bit of federal funding coming out. And I know personally, I was sort of struggling to figure out, you know, where is it coming out? Where do I access this funding? You know, specifically, how do we get at this funding? So I did, you know, some research and again, put together resources so that it's a little more, I think, transparent as far as where we can access this funding. So again, as a lot of you know, there's $8 billion set aside for tribes that's going to be available through the Treasury. And that's particularly going to be something that each individual tribe is going to be able to access. There's been a lot of contention already with that funding. So that will be, that particular funding will be at the discretion once it's available for tribes to administer within their jurisdictions. and basically what they said was that's supposed to be available no later than April 26th. Of course, the timing on that is not ideal. There's over 500 million in appropriations that's set aside for tribes. It's much higher now. A lot of that is coming out through traditional requests for applications that can be found in grants.gov and on agency websites like the Department of Public Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, USDA, HUD. So, those will be issued in traditional requests for applications. Some of them competitive, some of them non-competitive, but they'll still require submitting some documentation. There's the 100 million set aside in the food distribution program through USDA. They're currently in the process right now of working within working groups to determine exactly what that's going to look like in terms of the 50 million for facilities and then the other 50 million for food purchases. So they're determining that now there's the 638 demonstration projects, which are sort of the larger pilot projects, though they're supposed to issue a request for applications in the summer. So those will be coming out, and we'll be monitoring those, and we'll send information out as we discover it. And then you have your typical ongoing federal programs that are continuing to administer their programming and issuing their requests for applications through grants.gov. The world of philanthropy, and that's your sort of traditional, like you think of your foundations, your even your wealthy family foundations that donate to organizations. So they're kind of realigning right now to address the needs of their existing grantees and addressing the needs that are arising in response to the COVID situation. And so what they're advising at this point, and all of the major philanthropies have issued a pledge to support organizations through more flexible forms of funding, because they acknowledge that communities and organizations are stressed, and throwing a bunch of complicated application processes is not exactly helpful at this time. So they've issued a pledge to support organizations through this by being more flexible. One point of advice that we got that's a consensus right now in the world of philanthropy is that approaching any sort of current or past funders is a good way to solicit funding for what you're needing at this time. So looking at what your organization may have received over time, or what organizations that are currently working with funders that you can have discussions with them. You can continue to look for new funders within your regions through looking through a GuideStar database, which we'll get into. And then a couple of resources that I put together, just because I feel like there's just such this, universe and constellation of different resources, and it makes it difficult to know what's really applicable to native agriculture, to food, to health within this world that we're living in. So I put together a funding database with resources that are much more applicable to the work that we're all doing. And then a 48-month timeline that situates particular funding opportunities on this 48-month timeline, because there's just, I think, a lot of confusion about what to apply for when. So hopefully this is helpful for your process in terms of, gosh, where do we start? So, so those resources are also available. So again, just acknowledging our unfortunate sort of time limitation here, but again, we can develop follow-on modules. These are really, I would consider this, what you're looking at here, as your checklist. As you're getting into applying for, whether it's private funding from a philanthropy or a philanthropy group or foundation, or whether it's a federal source, this is the process you're going to be going through. And these are the various kind of major actions that you'll be responsible for taking. Some people like to kind of modify it a little bit, but just through my years of working on grants and funding, this is generally how it goes in terms of, starting out with coming up with your ideas, which most of us already have an idea of what our funding needs are. And so doing the work to articulate that, sketching that out. And what I always advise is to actually start with your own idea or your own need before you start looking at funding, because I think a tendency is for a lot of folks to look at funding first and then kind of alter their need to match the funding, which you really want it to be the other way around. You want to be driving the cart to where your need is defining what that funding source is going to be. So being clear about what the need is, then finding your funding sources, and then starting to look at what they're calling requests for applications, or the documents that the funders put out that say what they expect in terms of documents that you'll submit. And then getting into the project design, where you're really starting to, where that's sort of your point where you've made the decision to go for the funding, you've decided it's a fit. You start actually designing your project, or your, sort of putting more detail around what that funding need is, and reaching out to your program officers to make sure it's a fit. And then working internally to determine, any approvals you might need from your organization or your tribe, or whoever your sort of, hierarchy that you're working in. Or if you're an individual operator, that's you, so that's great. And then getting into the actual writing of the proposal, and putting together all the pieces. And I'll just say before anybody feels concerned that, so part of the resources I put together was a toolkit, which show how most of these kind of major pieces look. And so that you can go in there, and if you see that there's a requirement to put together a certain kind of document, that document is likely in that toolkit that you can go grab and go, oh, okay, well, let's just tailor this to fit what's reflective of us, our organization or our operation, so that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So a lot of that will be there for you as a resource. And then, once you develop all your documents, you'll get into actually getting everything submitted in a system, typically an online system, and then sort of waiting. Then you kind of go into the waiting period. So generally, this is the process. This kind of flow here is what you can expect. And again, kind of think of this as a checklist. Okay, so again, a lot of funding is coming out, whether it's CARES Act or regular programming. You can find a lot of that federal funding and the requests for applications on this grants.gov. And you just literally go into Google and type grants.gov. If you're an organization, you'll need to set up an organizational account. And if you're an individual, typically grants.gov is not really designed for individuals, but we will get into a couple sources that are more appropriate for individuals. But if you're an organization or a tribe or an entity, then you'll want to get registered here, and you'll go and click on this register, and then you'll follow the series of prompts, which they've made it a lot better. When they first came out with the system, it was like, wow. But it's gotten better as far as being a lot more user-friendly. So you'll want to get registered. Part of getting registered, and this isn't just for grants.gov, which again, grants.gov is all federal agencies. It's going to be everything from BIA to HUD to all of those federal entities. All of those opportunities are in grants.gov. So so part of this process is going to entail, if you haven't done this already as an organization, making sure that you have your DUNS number, making sure that you have an active SAM account, you have your organizational EIN, it's like the kind of tax number that you get. And these timelines right here, they say it takes up to 1 to 2 business days to get your DUNS, 7 to 10 business days to get your SAM. In my experience, it doesn't take this long, but they're giving you an idea that it could. And so if you have a deadline that's coming up really quick, you'll want to make sure that this is just handled and out of the way, so that you're not scrambling to try to make sure your SAM account is active. And again, to do this, any of this, they've again improved the process where you can Google, organizational DUNS, and it'll walk you through the process of, you know, securing a DUNS, securing your SAM, your TIN. But if you have any questions, if you get stuck on any of these processes, I'm happy to answer questions. Okay, so so back when I started in grants over a decade ago, we had to deal with paper submissions, which was actually, you know, a matter of reading the request for applications, getting everything typed up, printed out, FedExed out. Thank God they're not, you know, doing that anymore. Even the majority, I would say, if not all of the funders, federal, private, have gone to online submission systems, which is, it's pretty helpful actually, because a lot of it is attaching, it's filling out fields and it's attaching the documents that you put together. So, you know, your narratives with that you write out on Word documents, typically the process is turning everything into PDFs and uploading it to these systems. And they have, within the systems, they have some error checking functions, so you can make sure you're not missing anything, which was something we ran into a lot in the past, was submit a grant and go, oh gosh, we forgot so-and-so's resume. Oh my God, right. So these systems have gotten a lot better. But what I always recommend is if you're going after a federal source, what I would say is get familiar with these systems as soon as possible. Start kind of poking around, make sure you get registered. And because I think, and I've done this, is if you wait till the last minute to try to figure this out and then try to get your stuff submitted, you could run into issues, and then you risk the kind of trouble of trying to submit and not getting your stuff through. And that's just really, I've been through that, where you're like, it didn't go through and we spent all that time, and I don't want anyone to experience that. So I would say start early with these systems. Oh, let's just switch here. Let me see. Okay, so, all right, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna bump out of my screen here, and we're just gonna run a quick search in grants.gov and in one of the other major databases, GuideStar. So I'm just gonna show you guys how this works, and hopefully this isn't, you know, duplicative. I'm sure some of you have already done this, but we're just gonna take a quick look. Okay, so here we go. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my grants.gov screen here. Give me a shout if for some reason you can't see it. Okay, so I'm actually going to run a search without logging in. I'm just going to pretend like I'm somebody who is just wanting to see how the system works. We have our own organizational login, which we just click on here, and then it just offers a little more functionality and allows you to submit applications. You can't submit an application without being registered. So I'm just gonna look up a grant that I think some of you guys would be interested in. So let's just type in local food promotion. Okay, so so this is what you're gonna see, and this is what you're gonna see in a lot of funding search databases, whether it's GuideStar or grants.gov, even Google. I mean, you can even search Google for specific keywords. So if you're interested in food or you're interested in agriculture, you know, you'll type your keyword in up here where the keyword field is. And then you always typically have the ability to screen or filter your search so that you don't see, even like right here, you can see that we got 1,072 results, which that's a lot to go through. And you know, again, in putting together our funding database, we've done a lot of this work, I think, to kind of weed through a lot of this for our target audience so that you don't have to spend as much time searching through this, that we've gathered a lot of resources that you can go through and look at. so that you don't have to go through thousands and thousands of these. But you know, it's good to get to know the systems. So so I was looking for this local food promotion program through USDA. It looks like it's due pretty soon here on May 26th. So so if I want to apply for that, I would go ahead and just click on this. I would click on the opportunity, and then it's going to take me to a screen where it's going to give me the request for applications and any other information I might need. And again, so if you want to filter out though, if you're like, this is too much, all I want to know about is, let's say USDA, then I would click on through agencies, click on USDA, or if you're just interested in health, you know, you could go to Health and Human Services. You can also filter by eligibility. So, because some of these grants, they might not be grants that you can apply for based on, you know, they might only be for tribes. They might only be for nonprofits. So you would want to, you know, check for eligibility. So let's say we would go to Native American tribal organizations. So that's gonna give us a much more refined result. So instead of looking through 1,000 opportunities, we've got 6. So that's much more manageable than trying to look at thousands of these. So, so I'm gonna show you, we're gonna just take a quick look at GuideStar. And then we're gonna take a look at a specific request for applications. Okay, so let's go to GuideStar. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Just give me a shout if anything is not showing up correctly. So, so GuideStar is a database that holds opportunities for it. Well, it's basically a big database of all of the world's sort of, it's national and international nonprofit organizations. I think where some people, and I've done it myself, is so there are a lot of organizations in here that are not granting organizations. They don't give out money. They're just, they're actually on here just to show their information so that they can be found by a funder. So when you go to search GuideStar, and I would recommend signing up for a profile. I believe you can get a basic profile for free. So I would recommend signing up so that you have access to the information you need. So again, it's just like a lot of search engines where you'll click search. And here's how to weed out the organizations that are not funders. Because again, you wouldn't necessarily want to approach an organization that's also looking for funding. That's really not what we're looking for. So so what I recommend is you can come over here and click on organization, this tab right here, and then click on cause area category, and then scroll down, and you can find this code right here, philanthropy, volunteerism, grant making. So you click that, and then you can go to this subcode area here, where it'll kind of help you drill down to different kinds of grant making organizations. So you can look at if you want corporate funding, because some corporations have, or a lot of them have foundation arms where they give out funding. And that's a one way to request for funds. Private grant making is a lot of those, you know, the well-known grant making, private grant making organizations. So click on that, and that's going to continue to narrow your results. And then you can also, which is one thing they're recommending right now, is to try to find organizations within your region, because they're not as overrun as the big organizations right now, like Bill and Melinda Gates, Ford Foundation. It's unlikely that it's going to be hard to get through to those big organizations right now because they're so busy tending to their existing grantees. So you could narrow down to the state that you're in, you know, and look at, let's say you're in Alaska, and you want to look at folks who are giving out funding in your state. So that'll narrow down to, now we've got 20 results instead of, 17,000. And then, if you want to approach one of these groups, then you would, click on their information, and you could get their contact information. You can find out even here in the right, like how much do they have to actually give out? Because some of them have such a small amount of money that they might be supporting just a very limited cause. And you might be better off going for an organization that has a little bit more funding available, and checking to see if they align with what you're looking for. So that is GuideStar. So let's see here. Okay, so now we are going to look at, let's see here. Oops, there we go. Make sure you guys can see this. Okay, so are you guys, okay, here we go. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, so when you do, so sort of going back to that where we were in grants.gov, and we found this community foods project that looked really interesting. And so when you click on, you would click on that, and it would take you to a screen where you're going to find this request for applications, which is basically, it's going to give you all the information that you're going to need to be able to apply. Some really important things to look out for. So if I'm going, okay, wow, this community food project looks great. There are these key pieces of information that I look for to make sure it's something I'm going to be able to do, and to make sure it's a fit. And so to begin, I look at the due date. Okay, when is it due? Well, it looks like it's due May 4th. I would read the executive summary of the request for applications, and we'll look at it here in a second, to make sure it's a fit with my idea. I would look at what do they have available for funding, to see if it fits my ideas of the amount of funding I'm looking for. Because if I'm looking for $5 million, if I'm looking for $5 million and all they have is $5 million available, this might not be a good fit for me, because there might be other people competing for that money, and so that might not be a fit. And I'm also going to be looking for any special requirements. Do they require matching funds, which basically means they're going to expect my organization to also come up with money if we're applying for this. And then I'm going to look for the program contact information to make sure that I can, if it's possible, sometimes it's not possible, but that it's possible to reach out to that contact to see if they're interested in my idea. Because they might say, I'm sorry, that's really not a fit, but, and then you can ask them to point you somewhere else, to a different source if they're willing to do that. So let's see here. I'm actually going to take a look now. I'm just going to show you in the request for applications where you can find this. So let's go here. Show you what I think we want. There we go. So, sure this guy's going to show up. Okay. All right, are you guys able to see? I hope you can see this. This request for applications here. Okay, so this is the document that you're going to find. This is the request for application. So typically, again, if I'm looking for my information, so I'm going to get, okay, here is the information on the deadline. So it's due May 4th. So I'm going to ask myself, okay, do I have time? Is this something I have time to apply for? Or, and I've got looks like a rainstorm coming in, so my lighting went away. I'm going to turn on the light here. So I'm going to just ask myself, do I have time to apply for this? is it important enough? Can I, do I have the resources I need to be able to pull this together? Some things you might, I've had to let some good grants go just because I was sort of like, I'm not going to have time to put together the quality application I want. For other times I've gone, we've done enough writing on this, or I think I know a person I could talk to that can help with this, so let's put it together. So I'm, again, kind of going back to that bulleted PowerPoint, I'm going to look at the executive summary of the request for applications, which is really going to give me kind of the gist of what the program is trying to accomplish, to see if it's a fit. So, so it looks like what they're trying to do here is they're saying it's a program to fight food insecurity through developing community food projects that help promote the self-sufficiency of low-income communities. Community food projects are designed to increase food security in communities by bringing the whole food system together to assess strengths, establish linkages, create systems that improve the self-reliance of the community members over food needs. So I go, yeah, actually, this looks like a great program. So I would say, all right, well, I am interested in this so far, but let's make sure I meet the eligibility requirements. So I'm going to go to this page 11. So they're saying, okay, eligibility, you have to be a public food program service provider, tribal organization, or nonprofit entity, including gleaners, which, so I would go, okay, what's that mean? So I would, take my time to make sure, that I can fall into this eligibility, which I would say, yeah, we do. We're a nonprofit organization. We have experience with community food work, or, we do job training, business development, sure. Efforts to reduce food insecurity, yes. So, so that's an important piece of information. Yeah. So I would say, yeah, this looks pretty good. And then, so I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to apply, but I want to make sure that this is something they're going to fund before I put a bunch of effort into it. So I'm going to click agency contact. Okay, well, looks like Dr. Cotton and Dr. Koo. So what I think is fine to do, and sometimes they're too busy to respond, or sometimes they're not encouraging giving out feedback because they're concerned of conflict of interest. But given that they're providing their contact information here, I wouldn't be shy about sending a quick email with just a brief summary of your idea and saying, hi, I'm considering applying. This is our concept. Does this sound like something that's in line with your funding priorities? Would you be willing to, just talk with me for a few minutes to let me know, or email back? A lot of times, in my experience, they've been pretty helpful. I've had a couple that weren't, and I don't know what the reasons were. I just kind of let it go. But I would encourage that, because if it turns out to not be a fit, you don't want to spend 40 hours putting an application together, or however many hours, and then not have it funded. So that's definitely something to consider. Okay, so let's click back to here. Back here. Oop, new share. Sorry, hopefully nobody's getting dizzy with my screen clicking here. So let's go back to here. Okay. Okay, so a couple of things you can do as you're starting to outline, and again, we're not going to be able to get deeply into, there's a lot of parts of proposals, like the main narrative, which is typically anywhere they're 10 to 15 pages in length, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. But what we can get into is, and I think this is a really important activity, is getting into summarizing your idea. And again, what I usually recommend is getting clear with yourself and your organization what your need is before you start looking for funding. So So I have this kind of a couple different lists of questions that you can ask yourself. There's a couple ways you can do it. You know, you can sit down and write out answers to these questions. One thing that's kind of fun is to do it as a group, and you might even have somebody either taking notes or recording. You can record the conversation and then kind of transcribe it later, type it up later. Or there are even softwares, word transcription softwares. One of them is called Dragon, another one is called Speechy. So I love those because it's fun to kind of dialogue where you can, you know, either ask yourself these questions, ask your group these questions, to really get some content down on paper and get it like, what's really important here? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes? You know, what do we expect to achieve? Why is it a good idea? You know, how is it different than anything else? Why is this problem important? How does this tie into work we're already doing? And how can we kind of build on, you know, a lot of organizations have a lot of great work that they can cite and say, we've been doing this for 10 years and we want to continue to do this, but do it in this way, or continue what we're doing. And, you know, yeah. So that's one way I recommend, you know, starting to get this content down is to go through an exercise like this. Another one that I've used a lot is this kind of one-page summary, and this is all in the toolkit. So, you know, again, you can sit down and write all this out for yourself, do it with a group. And the reason is a lot of the content that's going to come out of this is content that is going to be usable in your narratives. So what you produce out of this activity, you can use it for your project summaries. You can use it to organize your narrative, your longer description of your project, and then, you know, start filling in more details. And it's also, this is the structure that I would say 99% of funding organizations use for their proposals. This is the kind of information they ask for. You know, they want to know what's the problem or the need? How are you going to solve it? You know, who are you working with? What are the results? What are your major goals? What are you trying to achieve? So it's an opportunity to really get some good content created, and then you can use that to work with on your narratives and other pieces. And so the other kind of major parts of the proposal, which again, these templates are available in the toolkit, and we can dig more deeply into these in further sessions. But so I like to think of it as kind of like it's a connected puzzle here, where the main narrative, you know, anywhere from, again, 6 to 15 page document that talks about the problem you're going to solve, how you're going to solve it, the results. That's your project narrative. That's sort of like your main piece of your proposal. And then a lot of the typical documents that go with this are this project summary. It's usually about a page or less. You'll put together a budget and a budget justification, you know, which is going to be talking about what you need to support your staff, or whatever salary needs you have, any kind of equipment. So this dovetails nicely off of, so Stephen gave the really great presentation on small scale farming, and there was some expensive equipment. And so, you know, there are a lot of grants that allow for equipment purchases. And we actually submitted a farm to school grant with a lot of that specialized equipment. And that grant application is in that toolkit. So you can look at how we did that, how we asked for that equipment. And we can work with you on any questions you have. So the other pieces are, you know, you have your, whether it's like a short resume or bio sketch of all the people on your team. A data management project is basically just saying, you know, if you have any results, like if you're working with students and you're expecting to track data on them, or any other kind of data you're tracking, like how many acres of you're conserving, or that's just typically a one-page document talking about how you're going to manage that data. You might have graphics, figures, tables, which could be, you know, demographic data. So how many people, what are their ages, where are they from, or pictures of your fields, you know, maps, things like that. Any references you might have cited in your narrative, like if you use the USDA Ag Census or any external documents that you cited in your narrative, you'll have an extra document that just says, you know, these are the sources I used. Approvals, you might not need that unless you're getting into a research project. So if you have an institutional review board, you know, if you're working with sensitive data, from people, like financial data, student data, health data, you're going to need to work with an institutional review board. Typically, those are at the tribal colleges, those are at universities. If you have questions about that, you know, where you can, if you have that kind of sensitive data, I'm happy to answer those questions. So these are your kind of typical proposal pieces, whether it's private, whether it's federal. I would say you can expect to have to put these documents together. And I hope that toolkit will be helpful, that if you can go, oh my God, what does a data management plan look like? That document's in there, and it's not as scary as it sounds. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's just saying how we're gonna store the data on the students we're working with. It's not too bad. And you can tailor that document. Okay, so, and this is kind of what the grants toolkit looks like, and the way that you'll, so basically, I'm going to get all of your guys' email addresses, and I'm going to give you access to this toolkit. And what I recommend is that you go in there and just download your own copies to work with on your own desktops or wherever you want to store them, instead of modifying the documents that are in there. And there's also there's some funding resources, which I'll just show you quickly in a moment. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to show you guys these funding resources for you to take a look at, and then maybe we'll just poke around a little bit in this toolkit, and then we'll move to Q&A. So let's jump out of here. So let's see. This guy. Oops. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so you guys can see the screen. So again, you know, these funding searches are extremely time consuming. You know, I would say this has taken me many hours to put together. But I wanted to create a resource for all of us who are doing this kind of work. Food, this is related to food, to agriculture. There's some resources for the COVID funding that's come out, corporate funding, private funding. So, so again, you know, talking about that request for applications process where you're trying to figure out, does it have enough money? Who's eligible? When is it due? So I went in and did a lot of that work so that you don't have to read through pages and pages of requests for applications. So in this Google Sheets document that's in your toolkit, there are just lists and lists of funding opportunities that I think will be of interest to you. And it'll show you the eligibility. So whether it's an institution, an organization, an individual, what type of funder it is. And then I have direct links to the opportunities, so you can go right to it. One quick way to search through this is just to do like a Control F, like if you want to look for a keyword like food, or you can just skim through to read the program descriptions. And there are some that I think will be really interesting to you. I highlighted these in green. And these are also on the 48-month timeline that I'll just show you real quick in a moment. But you can click these different tabs. So I've got a federal tab, I've got corporate, I've got miscellaneous private funders that are interested in food and ag, and then I've got a bunch of COVID related stuff that you can search through. And then I think you guys can see this. So again, I thought it was slightly confusing as far as, okay, there's all this funding coming out. it's coming from all these different sources, it's due all these different times, and I thought it was sort of confusing. So I situated it on this 48-month timeline, because they're basically saying what they're projecting is that that we can expect to be sort of dealing with the immediate effects of COVID and the recovery effects of COVID for this period of time, that this is a safe timeline to plan for. So I have, I've picked out funding opportunities for each type of group. So whether you're an individual, whether you're a small business, including ag operators, or whether you're a nonprofit, a school, I've listed opportunities that I think are really relevant for right now in this first 3 months. And then we move into months 3 through 12, where you start getting into emergency funding, or sort of stabilization funding, and then looking into capacity building, planning type funding. And then the time periods after that are really going to be kind of contingent about what happens in these first 12 months. If you go and apply for a bunch of these grants and get a bunch of them, then you're probably going to be managing them. Or if you get, a bunch of private funding, you're probably going to be in the thick of managing that. But we can continue to update this. But I just thought at least this could give you some starting points, like, okay, I'm an individual or I'm a small business, where do I start? That this hopefully is helpful. So that is all I have for now. So I'm open for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Micaela. If there are any questions, you can either raise your hand or send those over to the Q&A chat box, or the Q&A box of the chat box. But we also wanted to just share kind of a quick resource, another resource that is available to the producers. The USDA made an announcement last week about the USDA food box distribution, and the AIF team, along with one of our TA specialists, we will be hosting a listening session, just sharing some information about that opportunity, and that food box distribution is part of that whole larger coronavirus farm assistance program, and they should be releasing solicitations soon, if not already. And again, we just wanted to share that opportunity to the producers and see if that might be of interest. And I'm glad you shared proposals, because again, that's something that they should be seeking here shortly. But I'll let Courtney go ahead and take over now that if anyone is interested in sitting in on that listening session, they can, we should be sending out an announcement here shortly with the webinar registration link. But I'll let Courtney go ahead and take over any questions that are submitted or that have been submitted.
Okay, perfect. And if anyone does have any questions, please type them in, or again, like Lottie said, raise your hand. I think we do have Jacob Pelkey. Give me 1 second, I'll unmute. Okay, so Lottie, I think you have to unmute him since you're the
no
host.
problem. I got it.
Hey guys, sorry. Now somebody let me talk. This is Jacob Pelkey, the Rooster Band in McMax in Caribou, Maine. I have a question about lining grants up when you're intending to leverage one grant to fund another grant. So recently we applied to the Value Added Producer Grant, and we committed to a portion of those funds to be cash matching. But our intention was to apply for the cash matching through the NAF opportunities. But now that I'm working on the NAF grant to supplement the Value Added Producer Grant, I'm worried about the grants lining up in their timeline of awards. And I was wondering, do you offer any advice on being able to line those two grants up so that when we hear that the Value Added Producer Grant is approved, make sure that the NAF grant comes in time to actually make sure that it happens?
When does the value added producer grant end?
It'll be awarded in August,
Uh-huh.
and we're just beginning the process for the NAF grant, which will be submitted in June, and I'm not sure when those funds are awarded.
Yeah, because I know with matching funds, you have to, like, you probably know this, that the matching funds have to be committed and accounted for within the active grant period. So, which,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Okay, so that is new to me.
Yeah, like if your value added grant ends, and you're still like expecting funding to be coming from NAF after the fact, that they won't allow that. It has to be within the grant period. So probably the first thing I would do is, and I'm actually signed up for the NAF webinar as well, is maybe get a hold of NAF and say, you know, we're interested in using the NAF grant for matching on this value added grant, but we're just wondering if you can commit, you know, if we can commit those resources within our grant time period for the value added grant. Because I'm at this point, I'm assuming it's not going to be an issue, but it sort of, I guess, depends on, you know, it depends on how much matching you're using, and making sure that that can be committed within that award period. So that probably the first thing I would do is talk to NAF.
Okay. So the value added producer grant was submitted on the deadline last month, and then the NAF grants are now opened up, but we had written in to our value added producer grant that our tribe would be committing cash there, because we assumed that the funds coming in from NAF would then be expanded Micmac funds to count toward the value added producer grant. Is that a misconception, you think, just from a 10,000 mile perspective?
So when you submitted the value added grant, the matching that you pledged was cash from the tribe?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be sticky. But you know what you can usually do in that case is submit budget modification to USDA, where you can switch out your matching source. They would just have to approve it. So you know, so I think probably what I would do is I would figure out the NAF timeline. Like I would call the NAF staff and figure out when they're issuing the awards. And then based on that, then you might consider submitting a budget change request to USDA. But of course, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that till you had confirmation that you could use the NAF funding within that time period. So yeah, if you want to talk offline about that, I can certainly, because yeah, those match situations can be sticky, but there's definitely things you can do as far as like budget modifications and things like that. So
okay, that sounds awesome. Thanks so much, Micaela.
no problem.
Perfect. It looks like we do have another question. I am with Tribal Transit. Is there a toolkit I can find regarding the CARES Act funding to create an application? And I'm learning the grant process now. Also, is there a site to learn grants for beginners?
Yeah, there are a couple. So yeah, I'm happy to share the toolkit with you. And so, you know, we can certainly deliver more grant modules, but yeah, if I have your, and I'll take down the name, but I've got a couple resources that I think are, because there's a lot of stuff out there and not all of it's great, but yeah, I've got a couple links that I think I can send you, like a couple of videos you can watch that I think are actually quality. I'll be happy to send those to you. And then we'll just keep you apprised of anything that comes up in the future with modules that we'll be delivering.
I'm gonna allow them to talk. I'm not sure if they have a follow-up, but their hands has been raised. So. All right. So the person who asked about tribal transit, you're unmuted, so you could ask your question if you want to elaborate on your question.
Or give your first name so that we're able to make sure Micaela has your contact information.
Yeah, I can reach out to you.
Or you could type your first name in the chat too, but you're still unmuted. Or muted.
Yeah, he's muted.
I'm trying to unmute them, but it's not working on my end. So yeah, if we could just get their name, then we can go ahead and make sure that.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So whoever had asked about the tribal transit, if you could type your name into the chat, you could even just type it to us. That would be perfect. We do have one more question and probably time for just this last question. I come from a family with mixed heritage, but I've found many family names on the Muskogee Creek rolls. I am not a member of the tribe, but I believe that when I'm able to gather enough information, I will be eligible for tribal membership. My family once owned a gaming facility for our community, but after my father passed away, my family liquidated the business. Recently, the city condemned the building that the business was located at, and the city is seeking to purchase the property for my family, but I have been trying to prevent this by demolishing the building and rebuilding it. The building could have been eligible for historic recognition, but my grandmother was unable to get grants years ago. Since the business entity is no longer existing and the city is pushing to purchase the building, is this project a lost cause?
Oh gosh. You know, that sounds like a tricky issue, but I think I could put you in touch with somebody who could probably answer that question a little better than I could, because I know of some capital funding sources, which they're a little tough to find as far as bricks and mortar projects. But I think with issues you might be running into with the city, I could, if you want to type your name, then I can put you in touch with somebody who I think might be able to address that, the kind of stickiness you're dealing with the city, because that sounds like more of maybe you're getting into some legal stuff.
Perfect. We are getting names for the people who have asked questions, and then here's another. I work for the Muskogee Creek Nation, and you could apply for the Brownfields grant. I think that's in response to the last question.
Yeah, there's definitely some grants out there for capital projects, and there's a couple. They have some complications, but and we've kind of shied away from them. But new market tax credits. It's a source of capital that basically you'd have to work with an organization to make it work, but it's essentially funders who come in, and then there are like some government guarantees on the funding, and the funders get some tax incentives. But yeah, there's a couple programs for capital projects, and then there's some kind of traditional grants that you can apply for building projects and things like that. So I can share that information if that'd be helpful.
Great. Yeah, I think that ties up all of our questions, and we want to let everyone know that this webinar will be posted on our IAC YouTube channel, and then Micaela will just do follow-up emails with the resources and toolkits.
Yeah, and feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions or any trouble with accessing the resources in the toolkit, and I can jump in and help.
Perfect, and I posted the YouTube channel title right there. But yeah, we can send out Micaela's contact information as well. And thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you guys. Thanks for tuning in.